In this video, I want to show you a little bit about watercolor pencils, how to use them, and some of the benefits and ways you can really enjoy these. So first I want to tell you just a little bit about the products themselves. I've tried out a few different sets of watercolor pencils, and I can tell you that, for instance, this brand here, the Color In, some of these that are a little bit less expensive brands are really lovely to use. They're really, they come with a nice set of colors. As you can see, I can't get them all to come out, but let me get that blue to hang out there. But they're really bright and really lovely. I'm not sure what the light fast rating, or in other words, I'm not sure when I color with these and then the piece that I do is, if it's hung in the sun, how quickly it might fade out. So I don't tend to use these brands on commissioned works or anything that I'm going to hang in the gallery to sell. But I use them on cards and wrapping paper and other little fun projects and coloring booky kind of stuff that I do. And they're really beautiful. They can do some really beautiful things and brilliant bright colors and dissolve pretty well for me. So I like them. If you're going to look for some of the higher priced ones, two of them that I really like a lot is the Derwent and the Prismacolor. Derwent has an ink tint set that has really bright, lovely colors. It's a larger set than the 12, and they're really beautiful, bright colors. When you add water to them, they really explode with brilliance. They're lovely. Dissolve really nicely. They're lovely. Prismacolor is probably my favorite for a few different reasons. Toss these back in here so you can see them. This set is 36 pencils, which is a lot of colors. And I use the Prismacolor wax-based pencils, non-soluble or non-water-based pencils, oftentimes for most of my colored pencil work. I like them because of the wax. The wax is really blendable and creamy and lovely. I like the watercolor set as well best because I feel like these also are really creamy and lovely. Huge set of colors. Some of the colors kind of correlate to the wax-based pencils as well. So I'm used to these colors. I really am used to blending them, and I kind of know what I'm going to get when I blend two different colors together. So this is what I'm going to demonstrate with today. And other things that you're going to need is watercolor paper. You're working with a water-based media. So you want to get some watercolor paper. You can get the larger sets. What I have is 140-pound paper. I like pretty much the B paper company is really my favorite, I think. Strathmore is not bad either. I have these ready cut, and these are more of a 5x7, I think. And oftentimes in class we'll use these smaller sets just because they're really nice to get a project done and really get a feel for the medium itself. I'm going to demonstrate for you on the 9x, what is this? The 6x9. And oftentimes I won't use the 6x9 in class only because it's a kind of a weird shape and it's not so easy to frame with a ready-made frame, but it's kind of fun to mess around with. And the reason I like this paper is because when you paint on it, it doesn't tend to buckle up so much because it really absorbs the pencil and the water. It absorbs the water and the pigment really well. Now, if you're a watercolorist, you are used to taping this down to a board. That's obviously a really great idea. With these smaller sheets, I don't add so much water that I find that to be necessary. And so it's kind of up to you if you want to do that. In this case, I'm just going to play with this and suggest to you that when you get these sets, you just play with them first and really get a feel for them before you start a project and enjoy them that way, so you don't have to worry too much about how you start out with it. I like to use, for one of the methods that I'm going to show you, a piece of canvas, coated canvas. And the stuff that I'm using is this Frederick's, and it's acrylic primed. And you just take a sheet of this, cut off a little piece of it, or however much you want to, and I'll show you how to use that in a little bit and why I really like that. You'll of course need some water. My water's a little bit dirty because I've been playing around with this all morning, but Q-tips are kind of nice to have on hand, but not necessary. Still, they kind of can come in handy here and there if you want to have them. In class, I tell people to get a nice smaller round because we're working on a smaller project. If you're going to work on a large project, you obviously will need a larger brush, but a 4 or 6 is adequate for this. And I will typically tell people to get an angled shader too. This is a 5/8, and it's just kind of nice for filling in areas pretty quickly. You could use a filbert nicely as well. This is a nice big one. It holds a lot of water, so it's kind of a good one. Now these are all synthetics. You don't have to spend a lot of money on these, but they're watercolor brushes and they work really nicely. Okay, you need some paper towels or a rag or something to absorb water, and let's just jump right into it. I think I've told you everything, and you might maybe need something depending on whether you want to try some of these different methods. You might need something to scrape. An X-Acto knife. I have the back of I use this for a lot of things. I'm kind of a scavenger for things that I can use in different ways. This is the clip of the back of a frame, and it works really nicely for scraping pencil, which I do now and then. So let's start out with showing you some different ways that you can put this pencil down. So naturally, the very first way is to use it as a colored pencil. Just color it on. And this paper has a lot of tooth. So, and you can see that tooth as I color it. Do be aware of the little crumbs that come off of it, because those little bits, when they get in the water, will create some color for you. And you can blend this way too if you like. Try to do some nice big swatches here for you so you can kind of see what happens to this color, because one of the things I love about this medium is, let me get my angled brush here so I can show you a larger area of this, is that when you add the water, make sure I got enough light here to show you and not a shadow. Look at that. Isn't that pretty? Look at how brilliant this became. Really strong and really intense. Same thing with the blue. Wow, so pretty. Oh my gosh. What a difference, right, from where it was. And blending the two in between. Now naturally, the more you mess with this, the more you'll move the pigment around, and you may inadvertently create what you don't want. So you want to kind of get so that you're comfortable enough with this medium that you're not moving it around a lot, because ultimately you can eventually start erasing it, or you can move the pigment around so much that it just ends up somewhere else on your page, and that's not necessarily that great. Now, this piece of canvas, not everybody likes this method, so it may not be something that you necessarily have to have, but sometimes I like to have a separate palette so that I can just paint on. If I'm starting a piece, I like to paint the background or underlying color of things, and then put the detail on top of that once it's dry. So I'm going to use this yellow, this Spanish orange in reality. It just looks really light on here, so it's not really yellow, but it's Spanish orange. And get a little water loaded on my brush and add it to my palette. And the reason I like this coated palette is what's happening here. If I get another piece of paper and I start doing this, it absorbs my water and it takes in my pigment, and I lose a lot of pigment, and I end up using a lot of pencil just to get some watercolor on my brush, right? When I use this canvas, I'm not losing water or pigment either way, right? And I'm using a small brush, so but you can see, and then just like watercolor, you can blend. Put water on one side and let it lighten up that way. Use the light of the paper to make a lighter area. If I add a little bit of color next to something that's already wet, oh, it dried that quick, didn't it? I will get bleed. Here I won't get bleed though, because it dried that quick on me while I was blabbing away. Here we go. I'll get some bleed. Now those two colors make, because they're complementaries, are making gray. As we know, complementary colors, when you mix them together, will make a gray. So not the most beautiful combination, but considering how bright they are, maybe it's not the worst thing either, right? Other ways that you can use this pencil, or these pencil sets, is to put water on your paper just putting water on the paper, nothing else right now. I'll let it absorb just slightly and then pick out a color I want to use. Yeah, this bright springy green. And then when I go to color, oh, this is a really light color. You're not going to be able to see it very well, but I'm just kind of scumbling around. Ooh, there it goes. It's dissolving, and it creates kind of a felt tip marker kind of look. This right here is dry, so I can show you what it, yep, that's not that dry. This is dry. So I can show you kind of what the difference between the two looks like. Right? Let it bleed over so you can kind of see. A little more intense on this side. Didn't take as much to get that. This I had to scumble quite a bit more to get the color down. So you can use it that way, kind of felt tip marker like in a way, right? Now, some fun things about these colors is just the thing I really like the most is that I can take a color like red. Oh, this is an orange. No. I want to show you this one. Look at how dead this color looks in comparison to what's right next to it. But you know, it's just so awesome. That's that color. Just explodes. Wow, look at that. It's like fireworks on your page. And you can bring it over here and you can paint it down. You can get some really cool texture in there. Lovely bleeds. All the wonderful things that you can do with watercolor. Playing with this is just so fun because you can mess around with petals on flowers and sunset skies. You can drop water on it and watch it kind of bleed out a little bit. This is so full of pigment that it's not going to do that, but I can pick up pigment and drop it into other wet areas and let it bleed. Very cool, right? And if it's really, really wet, like this is right here, when it dries, it's very likely, and you can see it starting to form right here, it's going to do some blooming. This is something that sometimes people try to keep away from. If your watercolor is too wet, if you got added too much water into it, it will create these edges of bloom that are kind of pretty in a way. It's kind of the reverse of what you're seeing here. But if you're doing a sky or something like that, you don't really want that bloom in there. So I also can go back and take the water out of my brush and pick up. These are really just watercolor tips. Right? I can pick up, I can add more water to it and erase in a way. And come back and soak out or squeeze out the water out of my brush and pick up more. See how nice that is? I can create textures this way. If you have paper towel, you can soak it and lay it on top if it's not too wet, and then pick it up and it can create kind of neat textures for you. I'll have to do a video on that so you can see what that really looks like, but I'm not going to do that right now because it'll take too long for it to dry. And also, if you need to erase, I find this works better with a paintbrush, but now this is a dry area right here. I just painted this a little while ago, but if I bring a little water back on top of this, not a little, I'm actually adding quite a bit of water to this, and then blot it. I may have to do it a few times to really pick up the pigment. And if I'm scrubbing it with a soft brush, I'm not liable to mess up my the texture of my paper, which is important. Oh, reminder. Right, it's starting to lighten up. It may take a little while to get to that. You can also use Q-tips. You can see I've used this Q-tip already, but since I'm just playing around, I'm going to wet it and I'm going to squeeze out some of the water. And then I can come in here. Oop, I squeezed out too much of the water maybe. And just kind of scrub away a little bit, lightly, carefully, because otherwise I'm just going to create some pulp. And I don't want that, but see how I'm getting back to the lighter part of the paper just by adding water and dabbing. Okay, and that's just a way to kind of erase. If I twirl it on here, since I'm just playing around, why not? I can take off. Now that I pressed pretty hard and I can see paper pulp coming up, so just be aware of if you're kind of messing up your paper. You don't want to get too wild with it, right? And over here I have a purple that's also quite dry. You can use another color on top of it. Purple and green are a little bit creepy together, but no, they're really beautiful actually. Look at that. And it's just a little tiny bit damp over here, so it's going on a little bit creamier and smoother than if it was just on the dry paper, right? But even so, these Prismacolors are pretty smooth in their application to begin with. They're pretty nice. You know, I could leave it like that if I wanted to. It's kind of hazy in a way. Or I can intensify that green. Just remember, every time I add water, I'm kind of exploding color here and making it brighter. I'm really making that yellow much more strong within the green. Okay. Other methods, spray bottle, put down a little water. Oops, that was a lot of water. And take your scraper, find a color that has a nice sharp point on it, or put a sharp point on the color you want to use, and scrape. This is kind of a fun way to create variegation in trees like aspen trees or fall trees in the distance. Of course, my trees are pink and purple, so they're not very tree-like, but you can use a few different colors and just see how it's starting to bleed out. The more water you use, the more bleedy it can be. Really nice. If there's already water there and you feel like it's not bleeding enough, you can add more water. Just be careful because it will do some blooming things. You can see where I sprayed it. The water is pulling some of the pigment away from it, so it's actually light next to that, which is kind of a cool effect. But you don't always know what you're going to get, so it's not a very controlled method. Okay, so these are just a few little ideas of what you can do with it, with this particular medium. This is such a fun medium to use. I'm using it on flowers, but you can use it for animals. Put down your wash of color and go back in with a, say you're doing fur. You can get a hold of a brown. You can create those fur-like strokes on top of another tone of brown, and they can go in really lovely. See how it can, with a point, if you sharpen a point on the end of this, you can really do some wonderful detailed work. The Prismacolor and just a few other sets come with a white, and the really cool thing about white is if you're not adverse to doing this, don't do it too often because it'll wear down your tip on you, but it'll dissolve down the tip. You can dip it for just a little moment in the water and let it dissolve just a little bit. And if you're doing the pupil in an eye, say with the highlight on that pupil, you can come back in and add a dot of white, or if you're doing dots in the center of a hibiscus or whatever, it's just cool to have that option to add little specks like that, especially with the white. So just some ideas of what you can do with this wonderful medium. This is such a fun medium to use. I'll do a few more demonstrations for you on some actual projects that you can put together with this. And if you enjoyed this demonstration, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, and thank you for watching.